Hello and welcome to another episode of the Truffle Forager podcast, where it's my job to speak to truffle hunters, truffle professionals and truffle enthusiasts and everyone in between around the world and uncover their stories, insights, tips and share those with you for your viewing and listening pleasure. On today's episode, we are speaking to a leading truffle researcher, truffle scientist and a truffle cultivation expert, Professor Paul Thomas. This is our second episode. We did a really interesting episode nearly 2 years ago now, where we talked about some really interesting stuff, some woodlice truffle experiments that he was doing with his children in the lockdown, and many other things as well. But on today's episode, we're uncovering some of the more recent studies that Professor Paul has been involved in some of them relating to climate and how climate change and as the temperatures are rising and how that's affecting truffle yields of different species across the continent and what that means for different countries in Europe and around the world and also here in the UK. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We also dive into something really exciting, and he was very happy to share some really good news with me about a little project he's been doing in his own garden as it relates to truffles and growing truffles in a hedge, and some really interesting things that you might be able to pull away from that and potentially go away and grow your own truffle hedge and produce some truffles in your own garden. So without further ado, I want you to jump over into this episode and really enjoy it. And if you do get any value from this or any of the other episodes, I just ask you to share it with a friend or two, like as well and follow, just to make sure that you don't miss out on any updates as we start producing more of these podcasts coming up in the future. And real quick as well, just as we're coming into Truffle Festival season here in the UK Truffle Festival is just weeks away. So if you're listening to this as it's gone out and you haven't got a ticket, definitely jump on one. We do still have some available. If you're listening to this in the future, no worries. Join our email list or our waiting list or whatever it might be, or buy a ticket to that festival in the future because it's a really cool mini festival, two events in one. We've got the UK Truffle Festival and the UK Truffle Dog Championships, and you get both of them in one event, and it's really, really cool. Nice foodie event, dog lovers event, family friendly event right before Christmas. So check that out if you're interested. If you're interested in learning how to hunt truffles yourself with your dog, or you just want to connect with other like-minded truffle nerds out there, head on over to my website, truffleforager.com. There's lots of information there. There's also a really cool community called the Truffle Dog Club, which you can join. That's free at the moment, so join that. That's a really cool place where you can hang out and talk truffles and meet some like-minded people. But without further ado, here is Professor Paul Thomas.
Paul, lovely to connect with you again. How are you doing today? You all right?
Good to see you again, Ben. So looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, really. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And the last time I think we did this was, I don't know, maybe over 2 years ago. I actually haven't even looked, but it was a while ago. It may have been 2 years. Really good to chat. And I've actually asked some of my community as well, because I've let them know that, hey, I'm going to be speaking to Paul. If you've got any questions, now's the time to share. So I've got a few of those lined up as well. But I know you've been working on some really cool research recently that, some of the stuff that you haven't even been, massively able to publicly talk about yet. So it'd be cool to dive into some of that. But I guess most importantly, I'm really interested to hear how your how Rufum is getting on, your dog. Rufum, right? Is it called Rufum?
Yeah. Roof for short. Yeah.
Roo. And and also this truffle hedge that we spoke about on the last podcast. I'm just curious to see how that's been going and how many years has it been since you planted it, and any truffles yet?
Yeah. So it's been 5 years, and there's only I think 20 trees in that bit, or 25 trees, and embarrassingly, I only limed a very small strip, so it's right where the root zone is. But yeah, I was cutting the grass a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed brulee type formations. So the grass was getting depressed, and there's a bit of animal scratching. So I jumped off the mower, had a look, and found a couple of truffles just breaking the soil surface, which was super exciting and quite early and good for a tiny site. So
amazing.
So that's super cool. Left them in the ground and then watched them for a week or so, and lifted them out, and then I took Rue there subsequently. Rue's only ever found buried truffles, ones that I've hidden. I haven't taken it to a proper site yet.
Yeah.
So it's really good. She marked immediately. And then, you know what this is like. I started digging and I couldn't see anything. And she was getting frustrated and she was marking and kept marking. And eventually I pulled up just a tiny truffle.
Oh,
So she
amazing.
was absolutely right. But yeah, it was quite interesting, that bit of working with the dogs, because I'm quite new to that. When they're
Yeah.
marking and they're adamant and you struggle to see it. So that was interesting. But yeah, really exciting. And it's right by my back door. So that's great.
That's so cool. That's so cool. When you mentioned about the liming, what would you have done differently if you only, is that just because you were, I guess, watching the pennies and didn't want to buy loads of lime and do the whole area, or what was the theory there?
And no machine. So
Oh,
really, I
okay.
need to dig it in. And I'd done a hedge and a strip, and you'll see the photographs of this anyway. But so I was just using a spade. So I just did the strip
Okay,
where I was
cool.
planting, dug the lime in, spread some over the surface elsewhere, but not enough. So I definitely need to go and now apply a lot more lime. And I'd been adding some additives as well. We've been playing with some bacterial mixes and stuff like that. So I've been chucking some of that on from the lab. But yeah, and a couple of really strong brulees. So it's, yeah, really nice. And now I can just like study it and watch it, and it's there. I can do it like any time. So that's
That's
good.
so exciting. And 5 years as well. Like, you must be happy with that. That's a pretty, from the limited stuff that I know about how long it takes, that's pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I think so. We always say in the UK about year six seems about
Yeah.
right, but that's when you're planting loads of trees. And
Yeah.
when you've got a hectare, you've got one pocket that produces, the rest of it might not. So when you're planting only a small number of trees, I always say it's super hard to predict. It could be like year six, or it could be year 8 or 9, because you don't have that variation accounted for. So super excited. Yeah, it's really good. And the truffles are left in the ground. One of them got completely hollowed out by insects, but based on my
Nice.
previous work, I've got to be quite chill about that and be like, yeah, that's them doing their thing and the insects spreading the spore. So yeah, just got to let them get on with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and I think finding insects in truffles is, I guess, unless it's your day job and you rely on being able to find truffles at a good quality to sell them, for most
Yeah.
other people, it's just interesting, right? Like pulling out things where there's bugs and seeing how those things happen.
Yeah. Yeah,
Nice.
definitely. Bugs are interesting. Like everyone loves that from kids, don't they? So
I was going to
unless
say, yeah,
they
for anyone listening who hasn't listened to the first podcast, Paul talked about a really amazing, interesting study that he did with his kids in lockdown in the pandemic, where you were using and studying woodlice eating the truffles and how long would they basically poo the truffle spores out for, and therefore like disperse and spread them. And I think it was 18 days or more than that or something like that
yeah, it
they
was.
kept on pooing them out.
Yeah, that's right. 18 or 19 days, and the spores were completely undamaged when they were coming out, and we only stopped there because we just gave up. So we were
Yeah,
collecting the
yeah.
poop like frequently, and at 18, 19 days, I was like, I think we can stop now. So yeah, it was really good, and that got published. And we've been doing some follow-on work with insects as well, just because it's fun. But yeah, really good spore distributors and good for the organism to help fruition. Yeah.
I think that's because I mean that paper, like, I mean, I still feel like I don't know much about truffles, even though I'm shifting my entire life towards truffles. But um, that like really sort of changed the game, and thinking, oh yeah, truffles just get spread by bigger animals, eating
Yeah.
them up and then
Yeah.
pooing them, squirrels, deer, boar, whatever it is. But this was like, actually, there's possibly more dispersal going on by all the invertebrates and the small guys. Maybe I don't even know whether you think that. Maybe
Yeah.
there is more, but
Yeah, I completely agree. And that when we were doing this study, that shifted my understanding as well, because previously it was the understanding is mammals. But yeah, I think insects are really pivotal. And any of us who harvest truffles, we see that insect damage a lot. And also, when you look at the genetic evidence, we see that there's this high degree of variation over these short distances, and it's more so than over the long distances. When you compare it to long distance
mm,
variation, it's surprisingly high at that short radius, and that suggests a hyperlocalized dispersal mechanism. So yeah, I think the insects are like super, super important. And I would say I know very little about truffles as well, and I would say everyone does. The more
yeah,
we're learning, the more I realize we don't know much. And every day we're learning a bit more. It's like, wow, it's mind blowing. It just
yeah,
gets more
yeah.
complex.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I'm so happy for you about the hedge. I know we were catching up a
Yeah.
mini bit before we started and hit record, but like just how things are going for you, Paul Thomas, generally. I know you've got a chocked schedule and things like that, but just wanted to just see how you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so really busy. We've got some chefs coming over today, which would be great. So we've got the kitchen here, which is the staff kitchen. They'll be here, but we've got truffles from like England, Scotland, Wales, from our different orchards, so they get to smell and try those. But we've also got a range of academic visitors. We've had a number of residencies this year, and more just about to happen, where people come and work with us for a number of weeks and sharing what we've learned already, and we help them. So there's loads going on, and lots
Mm,
of pre-publication papers, and yeah, loads of super cool stuff. Yeah.
nice. And with what are the chefs coming up to? Are they what is that? What are you up to?
Yes, so one of them actually, I can say his name actually. It's Peter McKenna from the Gannet in Glasgow, which is a
Cool.
superb restaurant. Really, really nice place. If you ever get a chance up in Glasgow, it's got a great tasting menu. And yeah, so Peter's coming over with a couple of his chefs and some other people, but they're sailing. We're on an island. So they're rocking up at the beach, and then I'm going to go pick them up, and we'll go look at the truffle orchard we've got here and some of the truffles and things. So yeah, it should be
Oh,
fun.
very cool. So they chose not to get the standard ferry. I'm not even sure. Is it a ferry to get to your island? How do you normally get to the island?
Yep.
They thought they'd
Yeah, just a ferry, and yeah,
nice,
yeah.
nice,
You don't
love it.
have to book. You just rock up and get on the ferry. But yeah, they're sailing around visiting producers in this region. So it sounds like a really good week for them actually. So I'm looking forward to finding out what they've been up to. So
Nice.
yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about the National Truffle Centre as well, because I know it's what a few years now
Mm,
in the making, like since you sort of announced it. I guess
yeah.
from well, a how is it all going and things like that. But I know there'll be a lot of people listening to this podcast, particularly in the UK, who probably want to know a little bit more about it and like would be really keen to come up and drive up and get the ferry and come and see you guys and what would they get up to and what is that like for, I guess, not necessarily the big scale potential orchard owners or even the chefs, but for the everyday truffle lover, what.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got where we're based to where our lab is, we've got all the research going on here. So at the center, we built the lab where we've got DNA sequencing, microscopy, fungi culturing, a lot of the truffle work happening there. And we're working on other mushrooms as well, like chanterelles and things. And
Oh
we've
really?
got
What, to be able to
obviously
cultivate them,
this, yeah,
to be able to cultivate
yeah. So
chanterelles?
we're doing
Cool.
chanterelles, yeah,
Nice.
porcini, even fly agarics, because
Oh
we've got
blimey.
a theory about that porcini. So we're working on all kinds of stuff, but that's all going on here. And we've got a truffle orchard attached, and soon we'll have the barns ready, and then that will be an event space. So we'll run learning workshops and things for people to come and see what we're up to and learn a bit more. So that's definitely in
That's
the
so
pipeline.
cool. Just a quick one on that. The chanterelles, porcini, and fly agarics. They haven't
Yeah.
been cultivated successfully yet? Is that right? And so you're just working on that, or have they? I don't know. Maybe they have.
Yeah, actually, not really. So with chanterelles, for example, people have been working on it for decades. There was a guy called Eric Daniels in Sweden back in the 90s, and he managed to get mycorrhizal formation, and in one of the pots in his experiment, a chanterelle fruited. So that was the first case.
Wow.
And then there's a related Cantharellus strain to our European one, which is called Cantharellus sansataki from Japan. And Yamada, a really good researcher I know over there, Ayakoshi Yamada, he's gets the mycorrhiza forming, and he's had these chanterelles forming in his lab. So he's got these trees in big pots, and occasionally they fruit in these like almost sterile environment. So,
Wow.
but that's it. Nothing out in the field yet.
And
So
nothing like
we're
bigger,
trying.
bigger.
We've got some huge trials.
That's amazing. I could just spend the rest of this podcast talking about that because that really excites me. But I want to talk about some of the truffle stuff. Okay, nice. Well,
Yeah.
I wanted to one of the things I wanted to focus on. You've been always busy publishing papers, right, or related to truffles. And
Mhm.
there was one. I'm not sure if many people, at least listening to this, know about. You did one earlier this year. It was published earlier this year, I think, on the dog behavior and truffle quality.
Yeah.
it would be great to just hear a little bit about that, and perhaps with also your, your skill set in dumbing things down for us and making things comprehensible. Um, what sparked that paper? How did it even come about? And I guess how does any paper come about that you choose to do?
Yeah, so it came about because I'd been doing a little bit of work on truffle dogs and truffle harvesting, and it's kind of different to the main biological stuff we do. But I was working with a really nice researcher in the Czech Republic, Thomas Setka, and we published the first paper led by Thomas on truffle dogs and scent detection. And no one's really explored it from an academic perspective. And it opened up a lot of questions. So I was like, we need to do more stuff on this. And we also found that in a related paper, so there was two actually, we found that in Cambridge Botanical Garden, we had a researcher going around harvesting truffles because they produce there naturally. And we discovered when they do that on consecutive days, they always find more truffles on the second day, even with the same researcher, the same dog, the exact same loop. So it's obvious that all the truffles aren't being found by the dog on the first day. So this spun a lot of ideas, and I was like, we need to get more data on this. And I was talking to Julie Stopforth, who you know, who's a great truffle hunter working in Europe, and she's got a really good team. And Julie was really kind and started to log data for us. So I told her what we'd like to log. And working with Julie, we managed to create a data set of over 3,000 truffle harvest points across, I think it was 6 sites in Greece. With a number of different dogs and handlers, and we got them to log a whole wide range of stuff, collated all the data, and then did a huge amount of statistical work to try and tease out any relationships and work out what was going on there. And there's a lot of follow-on study we need to do, but that's now the biggest data set on truffle harvesting that's out there, and we learned some quite nice things. So it's good.
Oh, very nice. What was the basically the one or two key finds that you got out of that then from all the analysis? And were you surprised by the results at all?
Yeah, actually, so it tied in a little bit to what we expected, but we were able to tease out some other relationships as well. So initially, we looked at it from the point of view of ecology. So, are truffles bigger when they're deeper? Are they bigger when the season's warmer, when it's raining, when it's these kind of things? But because of the data set and the way Julie was logging, we were also able to tease out how frequently they were hunting, sort of bits about dog behavior and a bit about handler behavior, which was really nice. So the first interesting thing is that the size of the truffles wasn't linked to climate. So as the season progresses and the temperature and the rain changes, size of the truffles doesn't change, which was really interesting because everyone assumes more rain put up with bigger truffles, but in this data set, we didn't see it. They get more mature as the season progresses, so expect that. But what was cool from a dog perspective is the more frequently they hunt, the more immature the truffles. So if hunt frequency, if they leave a bigger gap in between, oh no, sorry, it's the other way around. I'm describing this wrong. So when hunting more frequently, they're finding deeper truffles. And this is because when they're hunting infrequently, they take the low-hanging fruit or the high-performing truffles. It's easier for the dog. From there, they can just harvest those. But if they're going more frequently, that low-hanging fruit or high-forming truffles is gone. So they've got to work harder. And that's when we start to pull out the deeper truffles. So that was quite interesting.
I've read this paper a few times and I've read that point a few times, and it wasn't until you explained it just then when I was like, I can now see like the connections and the penny drop moment. Like it makes a lot of sense. Because what I gleaned from it was, of course, if a truffle is deeper underground, it's relatively harder for that aroma to penetrate up through into the soil, into the air that the dog is then catching. Compared to the truffles that are much shallower, and so that just makes sense. Of course, if they go there, dogs will always cheat if they can. There's a dog cheat code. If something's easier, they'll go for the easier option. If they see a truffle coming out the ground, they won't even use their nose. They'll just recognize it by sight. So that makes so much sense. Cool. Yeah. And anything else that came out of that paper?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that was a big take-home message,
Yeah.
but also those deeper truffles we found are more mature, so they're riper, and they also have slightly higher levels of damage by insects and things. And I don't think this is because there's any difference in the deeper environment versus the higher. In fact, I would expect more damage in the higher forming truffles, but it's because those deeper ones are sitting in the soil for longer, because they're being detected less frequently by the dogs, so they have a greater what we call soil persistence time. They're just sitting there for longer. So this was quite cool. So there's little tweaks you can do to harvesting if you're harvesting a patch, and little training tweaks you can do to your dog as well to help them, encourage them to go for those deeper truffles. Because if you're not pulling them out, they're going to sit there and they will get damaged and they will rot, and probably a lot of them will be undetected as well. And there's been studies before where at the end of the season they've scraped the soil aside and looked what's left, and by that method we know quite a lot of truffles remain there, and that's the dogs are obviously a key part of this.
Yeah, I think I've had another chat with Alana McGee recently, and we were talking about this,
Oh,
and
cool.
like about the fact that so many truffles are still going to be left in the ground, even if you've got the best one, two, or even three top truffle dogs. I think she said a phrase, and she may have got it wrong. She said that 80% of the time the dogs will find 80% of the truffles, and that's the elite. Also, that's the elite dogs. So I think I got that right. It kind of makes sense in my head loosely. But yeah, super interesting. I love that. What does that has that paper got any like part twos in the pipeline or?
Yeah, there's a couple. So one is actually we took or Julie collected for us tiny pieces of each of those truffles. So we've been analysing spores from each of those, so we can look at how good they are from a reproduction point of view, and tease apart relationships there. However, this involves about a third of a million spore measurements. So we're slowly working. That's probably going to take a lot of time. So we're slowly working through that. Various people have worked on it so far, but then also follow-on dog studies. So definitely we need to do more on that. And there's a little bit we're doing on Scotland. There's some trials we're planning, because I think we can really tweak the dog behavior to recover more. Now we're understanding what's happening, or we're starting to understand. We can tweak and twist the behavior and in a way to harvest more. So there's a number of scent studies I want to work on.
Well, if you think of anything that might be useful from like a UK perspective for wild hunting, like let me know, because I can probably help facilitate that amongst hopefully a good bunch of people. That'd be quite cool to do.
Definitely. I'll write that down.
Nice. And also just, you've done quite a lot of papers and study on, and it's quite a hot topic really, the climate change and truffle yields in Europe and probably other places in the world and stuff. And I just wondered if, you have any like fresh insights with regard to that, or what's the latest, is it still death to the white truffle in a few years or whatever it might be as temperatures rise, or what are we seeing?
Yeah, and unfortunately, since we started working on that, so that original paper I did in that, I think was 2019 now, so it's a while back. But yeah, seeing pretty much what we predicted. We've seen those declining trends. Hungary, for example, this year, a massive drought, summer truffle production collapse. Even they have a sort of desert truffle out there, this honey truffle, which grows in sand, really sandy soils, and even that's pretty much, they're really struggling to harvest because it's just been so dry. So these trends are happening. And then, of course, the UK is getting slightly milder, wetter in the west, which is probably why up on the west coast is doing quite well, like in my garden for truffles. And we are working on another study on that, actually. We've done, with some colleagues at University of Stirling, we've done a big modelling exercise. So that's in the pre-publication phase at the moment. So maybe in about a year's time, we'll have hopefully another nice study with some quite nuanced insights in that, and really geographically focused. So there'll be like small grids overlaying the whole of Europe, and we'll be able to look at how things are panning out in those different regions. So that's coming. Yeah.
So just to summarize that, the consensus is obviously the tuber magnatum is still looking, and other truffles like you just mentioned, and not looking great with regards to rising temperatures, but things are looking better, at least in the UK and regions around us, for the aestivum, incinatum, whatever we want to call this. That's looking promising. What about specifically like the Milano?
Yeah, so actually, the most data really is on Milano and aestivum, and those are the vulnerable ones, and those are the ones which we've got most data on, and those are the ones which are showing a real response. For magnatum, there's lots of anecdotal evidence, but we haven't got the size of data sets that I would like to be able to look at that properly. And that would be working with people like Julie and others to collate more data on that. And I'm super keen to do that. But obviously, because it's largely a wild harvested crop, it's quite hard to get people to engage. And we know from anecdotal evidence, there is big issues with the magnatum harvest. But most of the stuff that we know and we've got statistics on is aestivum and Milano. But in the UK, faring a lot better. Yeah.
Nice. And I interviewed a podcast guest a while back, and this was very anecdotal, but he said he found, or he thinks he found a tuber melanosporum in the UK. Was it Gloucesterish way? Wild, apparently. Is that something that would surprise you, or do you think that could happen, or do you think it's what do you think we could be starting to find more of these if we start looking for them, or what's your thoughts around this?
Yeah, there's two sides to this, I would say. One, as a completely natural occurrence without any human influence, almost impossible. Because we don't have melanosporum naturally, and that's because when the UK was connected to Europe by a land bridge, we had other truffles moved in, but for various reasons, melanosporum never made it across or never survived. So we know it didn't sit here naturally. However, through cultivation, there's now about 4 sites, I think, at least in the UK that have produced melanosporum. So we know climatically we can. Now, since the Industrial Revolution, we've had around about a 2-degree shift in temperatures, and specifically winter temperatures have got warmer, and so we know it will fruit here. So wild is possible, but I would suspect, spores transited by humans, or at least because melanosporum has been brought to the UK and then the spores have got in there. I'd be very interested to know more about that.
Yeah.
But I would say there's going to be a human link in there somewhere, but it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Nice, love that. Just because I know you've been pivotal in the successful orchards that have produced Milano here in the UK. Like, are you getting more requests by orchard owners to plant Milano? And how much more challenging is it to grow that versus aestivum here in the UK? I'm assuming it's more challenging.
Yeah. So I always tell people it's really what's the word? There's not much data on it. You're going to be lucky to produce. But having said that, we've got sites obviously in Wales, southern England, and not many people are planting because I keep telling them it's really high risk, and most people stick on aestivum, or they'll do, say, 50 trees of melanosporum at the edge of an orchard, and I think that's a good approach. Yeah. I've planted some here as well on the Isle of Bute in Scotland just to see what happens. But I think it's definitely possible in the UK, and I think on the right site, quite light soils that will warm up quite quick in spring. Yeah, I think there's all the indications are that it could work quite well here. At the moment, not many people are planting it, that's for sure.
And I'm guessing, I don't know anything about this really. Well, maybe no more than the average person, but how much different is it to focus on doing a Milano cultivation in, say, France than it is in the UK? Because obviously very different climates, different soils. How much different is the approach, without giving trade secrets away, but like what you can share?
Yeah, cool. So there's a huge difference between growing it in France and the UK, and a huge chunk of that is climate, but another chunk of that is pre-existing species. So, for example, in southwest France, you grow melanosporum. If your trees are too dense, If conditions aren't quite right, you tend to have other truffles come in and they can dominate and they can take over production, like tuber brahmale or tuberous Stephen. In the UK, we have very little tuber brahmale, especially in places where people are planting. So we don't have that same competition, especially where people are liming. And we also have this very, very different climate. I know the quality of the melanosporin that I've seen in the UK is extremely high. It's coming from, some really wet summers. And I think that our previous understanding of what is perfect for melanosporum is probably wrong. I think at the high end, so at the end of extreme temperatures, low rainfall, we pretty much know what's happening. But at the other end, what's optimal in terms of how wet it is or how cool it is, I think we've got a long way to go. When we crunched the data years ago, when we did these response graphs for Spain, France, and Italy, so if you imagine a graph like this, and you've got rainfall going up here and truffle production along here, the graph's like this, and it ends round about here for the highest data we've got. So in much wetter years, production is much higher for all these countries, and in much cooler years, the production is much higher. And I think what this hints is that the climatic optimal for this species is probably different to what we've all assumed, and probably UK could be a very good climate for it. But we've got to prove that, of course. But so the cultivation practices here will be very different to what it is in France and Spain, where you've got much different soils, much hotter environment, and much drier conditions. And that's the same for a Stephen. You take the approaches that I use for a Stephen out there and apply them here, the production will take 10, 11, 12 years, and it's completely different fish versus the methods we use. So, yeah.
Super. So I wanted to ask you about, I know you've said, or you've teased to me that you're working on some really cool, interesting stuff coming up and stuff that's not fully public and things like that. And for what you can share, like what are you most excited about at the moment that you want to share with us that you're working on?
Yeah, so we've been looking at, I won't give specifics because it's pre-publication and some journals don't like that, but we've been looking at the microbiome associated with truffle fruition, specifically truffle fruition. So we've looked at trees side by side across many sites that have similar characteristics that are producing or not producing, and looked at the associated fungi and bacteria and what those communities look like. And that has been super cool, super cool. So, and one thing I can say is the biome is completely different when they begin fruiting, and it looks like the truffle is engineering that environment, so it's changing it in a way that benefits itself and the host plant. And these communities become more cohesive. So we do these networking diagrams to see how the different bacteria and fungi are interacting with each other. And when the truffle begins to fruit, at that point, that whole community is changed. The assemblage is changed to one where we have all these nodes interacting, and it becomes a networked, cohesive community at that point, and not before. And this appears to be engineered by the truffle itself. So it's super cool. And, there's a lot of people who say, this bacteria, it's good, or this bacteria, it's good. What we're seeing is it's not specific bacteria, but it's the function of them. And it's not one or two bacteria, it's the whole community. And even further, it's driven by the truffle fungus itself. So that's like, I can go into more depth on this maybe in 6 or 7 months, but it's really, really cool stuff. And it just opens our eyes a little bit more about how these systems work and how they're interacting with the wider environment, linking everything, soil chemistry, microbes, the plant host and the fungus all together in one sort of holistic system. But no wood lice in that study, so that's a bit messy.
So when you say the microbiome, you mean what do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so it's the environment around the truffle or around the fungus. So if you imagine the brulee where the grass is depressed, it's the environment within there. And what we do is we choose an area, and for this study we chose very specific areas, and we take the soil, and from like 1/4 of a gram of soil, so a tiny piece of soil, we spin out the DNA from that, and we'll typically spin out about 400,000 strands of DNA from there. And then we do a whole load of computational work to work out what organisms are in there, from a bacteria, fungi, even invertebrates we can look at. So that's the biome, that is the microbial biome. So it's everything in that soil community that is there with the truffle. And then we go a bit deeper. So we look what functions they're doing, what genes, the genes they've got in their genome, what they're encoding for, what they're doing there, and then all networked and connected they are. So it's it's really cool. It's really
Nice.
cool. And we've been doing a bit of truffle competition as well.
And so you're doing that over like the harvesting period. So from like when truffles are not like novice, new, babies to mature truffles, and seeing. So what's the hypothesis there? Are you just looking to observe what's going on during that process and how the truffle's linked? Is that the idea of the study?
Yeah, so we picked one continent for the first one, and we've been crunching the data on this, we've replicated this on another continent, which will make it even stronger. But we took productive orchards, and we took non-productive orchards of the same age, and we took trees with brulés, without brulés, and trees that were producing truffles. So we've got these 5 categories. And these are paired sites. So in each geographic region we looked at, we had a non-productive orchard and a productive one of the same age. And both those orchards had trees with and without brulés. So it's a really nice paired experimental design. And we did it in the truffle season. And on the first continent we work on, we do it across different regions. And in the second continent, it's the same. The second continent, we haven't crunched the data yet. But and then we check a whole wide range of soil physiochemical variables, so things like aluminium, copper, nitrogen, all these contents of the soil. Look at the microbiome, link it all together, and see what we see. And that's been really good fun. Hard work, but really good fun.
Yeah. Sounds like pretty an epic study there. What's the team around that look like? Is it a small team? Is it a big team? Or
yeah. So we had people on the ground who helped. So we recruited people on the ground to help with sampling, and then once we received the samples, super small, just 3 of us here. So it's myself, Mohammed Salman Zahid, who's my colleague here, who works in bioinformatics. And he's been working with me for 16 months in the lab, and every day we've been discussing and tweaking and working on this. And also Adrian Slater, who's a retired professor of genetics from Demont, and he's based on the island as well. So it's been us 3 really at the coalface
cool.
working through this. And it's been super nice. And then the follow-on study, we're bringing in more people for the other stuff.
So a real fountain of knowledge on the island of Bute at the moment then with regards to truffles. How come you decided to set things up there? Was that just a personal decision that, and then you built on there, or was there a...
Yeah, personal. Yeah, my family is Scottish, despite my accent. So my dad's born in Scotland, my granddad and everyone. And I was brought up in Manchester. That's where I was born. And then my parents moved back up to Scotland a number of years ago. We had young kids at the time, and we were visiting a lot. And I thought, yeah, ticks a lot of boxes. Live near the sea, live near the parents for the grandkids, and all that kind of stuff. So it was a personal decision. And of course, there's no natural truffles here on Bute or the west coast of Scotland because it's too acidic. But so that's why we arrived here. But I'm really glad we have, and doing really interesting things up here. Yeah.
Awesome. I just want to circle back to the success of your truffle hedge, because I know there's been a lot of people out there that like the idea of being able to buy a few trees, like, the hobbyists, buy a few trees and then stick them in their garden and hope that they can have truffles in X number of years, or potentially even do similar to what you've done and replicate a hedge or even a very mini orchard. Like, if somebody's buying some truffle trees from yourself, I'm assuming probably they're Stephen. What are like the best steps that they can do to set themselves up for success if, say, they're doing this in their garden, or maybe they have a bit of land? Are there things to massively avoid doing, like, because that would just be detrimental to the success? And then what should they do?
Yeah, definitely. So the key thing is soil pH adjustment. You want to check your soil pH which is a measure of acidity or alkalinity, and you can buy soil pH meters online to do this. And then you want to get your soil pH above 7, ideally. So 7 is neutral, 7.6 we think is ideal pretty much for a Stephen. So you want to add lime to the soil, which is what I did here on Butte. My starting pH was about 5.2 or something, which is really acidic. And I just dug a trench, dug the lime in, mixed it all up, and planted the trees. So your key thing is to add lime, and more than I did, because I only did it in the strip where I planted the trees. And really, you want to lime a much bigger area, because the truffles would form sort of the canopy of the tree projected down, so it's that area. So you want to lime a bigger area, and weed control. And those are your two big things. Weed control is big. Without weed control, the trees just grow very slow, and your harvest will be delayed. So those are the two key things really. And plant your trees close together, because you want that interaction. You want them to interact and the roots to interact, which is what I did in the hedge. The trees are just about this far apart, about a meter apart.
Is that close together? Because what about when they're super mature and much bigger? Would that be a case of you would take one out, or if it lighting became an issue, or I guess it's probably different depending where we are, right? Scotland versus France, or
definitely. So I've only planted one tree deep, so it's just a row of one trees. And I planted them really close together. So I'll just prune the hazel as well. So that's the other thing I should mention: hazel trees, which are good for a hedge. And then I just prune the branches to lift them up, and I think that's what I'll do. I think I'll keep all of them.
It's a non-issue, as you say, if it's one row, because then I guess you haven't got multiple rows and stuff, making it even more locked in, assuming that's a problem. Awesome, cool. People go and buy your trees and plants and get some truffles in the next 5 years in your own hedge. Very cool. I also just want to circle back. Was there any other interesting research projects that you've got going on at the moment, other than what you just mentioned, that you wanted to talk about, or future plans for things that you want to do?
There's loads of stuff, to be honest. We're working on that desert truffle I mentioned from Hungary. It's crazy sweet. You nibble it, it tastes like honey. We're doing some work on that. It grows with asparagus rather than trees. We're doing lots of work. Obviously, I hunted with Puccini and things like this. So there's loads going on, Ben. Absolutely loads. But that makes it exciting, right? So lots of collaboration, lots of projects, and working with sort of broader fungi species as well, which is kind of cool, because then we can take that learning to the truffle world, and we take the truffle world learning to those other species as well, because they grow in a similar way.
So I mentioned before the call, I'd mentioned to my Truffle Dog Club community online that I was going to be interviewing you. Everyone got very excited, and I asked them basically, was there any questions that you had for me to share with Paul? And I filtered some of these out, but there was a couple here that I thought were quite interesting. One from John McGowan, who I believe you know, and he's basically a friend of mine, and he's hunting on several, if not, all of his orchards. That he's a truffle hunter, for people listening. He hunts in the north predominantly, and hunts on people's orchards. Mostly your orchards, I think, Paul. And he asked a question. I think he shared the story earlier in the summer when he was going out and having a looking at two different orchards, very close. Like I think they were within a mile or 2 miles. One of them, he went there and they found loads of truffles, but they were all swarming with the truffle beetle Leodes cinnamomea. Is that how you pronounce it? So I had a question from John McGowan. He's a truffle hunter in the UK, normally hunts up northern UK orchards, many of them who are mycorrhizal orchards, as I understand it. He hunted this summer in two different orchards that were very close together and similar-ish, right? But one of them, and I think close together, they were within a mile or two of each other from memory. One of them, though, they found loads of truffles, and they were just swarming, teeming with the truffle beetle, the Leodes cinnamomea, or however you say the Latin word. I'm not sure. More than he had ever seen ever, and it was almost like a ridiculous amount. And then he went to the other orchard and hunted loads of truffles, and there was none, and the truffles were good. My question is, what insights do you get from that? And also, secondly to that, John specifically wanted to know, based on the access to orchards that you have at the scale that you do, has it been a particularly prolific year for these truffle beetles in truffle orchards, or is that just a isolated incident? Or is that quite normal to have, bumper years of truffle beetles or other invertebrate?
So I think I got the question. So it was,
Cool.
is it a bad year for Leodes,
Yeah.
basically? And yeah, the answer is no. So across the range of sites, we're not seeing any increased damage across the board. But I would guess that's probably a hyper-localized issue, a hyper-localized population issue. And that's definitely something we can address. There are ways to mitigate to some extent this kind of damage. So yeah, that's definitely something we can look at. But yeah, I think across the board, not seeing it be a huge problem. I'll check with Lindsay, because Lindsay is the person who actually processes everything here and deals with it and works with people on the ground. But I think from everything I've had discussions with her, I don't think it's a big issue this year. So I would guess that's a hyper-localized population thing.
Nice. Yeah, I'm remembering now because we actually spoke about it on one of our Truffle Dog Club hangouts that we all get together and chat. And John brought it up, and I'm remembering now. Julie was on the call as well. And when you talk about mitigating it, I think actually the other orchard that was nearby, they also use the land for pheasant shooting, and so there's pheasant population there as well. And I'm not sure whether that had something, the fact that they're eating these beetles and keeping the population down. And then Julie chimed in and says, yeah, I think they've got chickens going through her little, I guess she would perhaps call it a hobby plantation she has in her garden. But yeah, is that one mitigation thing, or is there something that's more I guess more scientific?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that could be a good mitigation thing, but there are sort of management methods, and even things like there's certain trapping mechanisms to try and get the organism at certain stages of its development. It's not something we've really had to address so far, actually, because on the sites thus far, it hasn't been a huge issue. But it sounds like on this one it is, so that's definitely something we'll need to get in touch with the partners and discuss. And I'll talk to Lindsay about that after this and see what we can do there, because there are definitely options. Yeah,
That's cool. I'll ask John if it was one of your mycorrhizal ones and tell him to send a message or something. But
yeah,
cool.
please.
Glad to see it's not a national wide thing. That's cool. Another question actually that came up last night in our community that was quite, I guess, of a hot question was around truffle inoculation of trees and stuff. And as we're, creating new orchards, I think predominantly the focus was here in the UK. Is there, or do you take into consideration that the truffle variant of Stevum when you're doing the tree inoculation? Because obviously we've got the summer variant and the autumn winter variant, and what's the process there? Because the orchard owners that I see in the UK, they're obviously harvesting. They seem to be harvesting truffles in the summer and in the autumn. So it seems to be they've got a mix. I wonder, did that happen naturally, or was there strategy to inoculate half the trees with one and half the other, or how does that work?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a very conscious strategy for that. So we use only super ripe, dark, mature, uncinnatum types, although Stevum and uncinnatum, they're very closely, you can separate them slightly phylogenetically depending on the area, but almost certainly the same species. But so we use the later forming one, the highly aromatic dark. And also now we only use ones from our own orchards as well. So we only use material from sites where they've produced in cultivation. So we've got two avenues for that genetic selection. How important that is, I can't actually quantify. So I don't have, as a scientist, I'd like to have solid data to say if we use this inoculum versus this inoculum, it will make this difference. But I can't, because we haven't got that data. But definitely, I think it is probably going to have some influence. So we use only inoculum from orchards, producing orchards in the UK, and only that dark, later, really ripe forming one from the UK again. So we're very conscious of doing that. One thing I would say, though, which is super interesting, so when we produce trees with the same inoculum source using this, if we plant them, and we've had this from the same batch in England, Wales, and Scotland, I think all those three on the same batch, when they come in, when we're getting them from the orchards, they smell different. There's a different aroma from these three different geographic regions, even though it's the same tree stock, seed stock, the same inoculum source, the same year, but there's this different aroma. So there's definitely, a terroir, I guess you call it.
Yeah, yeah.
I would guess it's probably climate derived, but there is a slight aroma variation between these different sites,
I
which
guess
is quite interesting.
I guess that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because when you think of the wine industry and you think of all these vineyards and the tiny little changes, and you've got sommeliers that can tell the difference between, one vintage year or one, different region
Yeah,
from where wines are based on, sometimes just smell. And so, yeah, it
yeah,
makes sense. When you've got all these other variants, it would impact, you would think it would impact the chemical pattern of the volatiles within the truffle slightly. And I guess that also
yeah,
lends the same argument, the people that the tuber magnatum from Alba, it's the only one that is from Alba because it smells differently and people apparently can
yeah,
smell the difference, but I don't know. Um, but yeah, that's super
yeah.
interesting. So just to confirm then,
And
so you inoculate with, let's call it the autumn truffle for orchards, or do you
yeah,
not distinguish? You just, if it's dark and ripe, it doesn't matter whether you've harvested that during the summer or autumn, or you definitely only inoculating yeah, part one question that is.
yeah, yeah. Normally the later one, yeah, because we
Yeah,
want our sites to be producing later.
yeah,
So yeah, it's pretty much after September, darker, highly aromatic, and from orchards. So that's kind of our criteria, really. Um, the other thing with the aroma, I would say, is like we notice that difference between sites, but so do chefs. So there's a few
mm,
chefs we sent to from different orchards, and they will cherry pick which one they want. So some want them from Kent, for example. Some want them from Scotland, or some want them from elsewhere. And it's yeah, it's quite interesting. So it's like eye of the beholder stuff. What
yeah,
we
yeah.
think might be better, a chef thinks a different one's better because it's a warmer aroma or something. But they can definitely smell the difference, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
That's very cool. And just on
Yeah.
the previous question, inoculating with autumn truffles in the UK. If then, let's say 7 years, 6 years, whatever years later, that starts to produce, would you expect it to only be autumn truffles that would be produced from there, or would you say it would? And if so, like that's mad, isn't it? How does that work? Like, I know that's probably a tough question to answer. Like, how has taking the spores from a clearly an autumn truffle? So yeah, just that's a mad, mind-boggling
Yeah.
question, I
Yeah, so the
think.
fruiting period is really long. It's super long. Like, as you know, sometimes you can find truffles in like May. You can
Yeah.
find them like super early and sometimes really late. It would be like January, February. So we've got this really long period. That Stevum uncinnatum differentiation is really muddled. It's really muddled. And from the same tree, you can be harvesting truffles in early summer and you can be harvesting them super late. So I think it's just how the organism works. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's just what happens.
It's
You get some of these
adaptable.
earlier
Yeah.
fruiting bodies, yeah, and
'Cause-
and you can bias that, and definitely climate drives it as well. Because in Southern Europe, you get a lot more of those very early seasons. Like that study we did in Greece, it's March. Like
mm,
at the end of March, the season's over. It's like
yeah, yeah.
super
It's
early,
mad.
and it's all really a Stephen, really light color. So, or largely. So yeah. So I think the climate makes a huge, huge
Yeah.
difference, and year on year, I think there's variation as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting because what I hear as well, I hear quite a lot of misinformation about this actually, or misunderstanding.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the hunting world is like, oh, don't go out and hunt truffles in June, July here in the UK because then you're starving you're not going to get the ripe ones in autumn and you're causing damage. And for me, that's
Yeah.
it almost doesn't make sense because you've depending how you look at it, you've either got one really long season, right, from like early summer to, potentially February or January, whatever the late ones are going,
Yeah.
or, you've got these two different variants of the same species, and they've each got their chunk of a season which overlap and stuff. And can you speak to that? Like, I mean, maybe you can knock that myth out the water. Like, people hunting in the early summer, they're not going to be impacting the truffles that were already due to come online in the autumn, because that was when that particular truffle decided to mature. And even though it had a sister that matured next a few feet away, and it was in the summer, like, is that because that's what I'm seeing on the ground. Don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. It's a big question, and I would say honestly, we don't really know. We don't really know. We don't know how long the truffles take from the initiation to maturation. We don't know how long that period it is. The best evidence I've come across, and I've mentioned him before, Gaiavani in Italy.
Yeah.
He's superb. He had this little box with the LiDAR detector, and you could see truffles growing and swelling, and some being reabsorbed by the mycelium. So it looked like they were forming across the summer, and some were just being pulled back and reabsorbed, and then some were making it through to later maturity. That was with melanosporum, of course. But I've really wanted to do this study, and I think the technology is there. I probably need to collaborate on someone to do this and really nail that down. And now I've got this site right near my back door. I'm hoping I can do some things around that, because we just don't really know. The other thing is, if the dogs are hitting on them, they're releasing aroma. So you would class that as ripe if the dogs are hitting on them. So I don't know. It's really mixed. It's really mixed,
Yeah.
Ben. I just don't know. Yeah,
Good, mate. I
yeah.
love it.
It's
Love
a
it.
tough
Good
one.
answer.
No, I was just thinking from the in the summer, if the truffles aren't harvested, and if they degrade, then all you're doing is actually helping build that spore bank. Because a lot of commercial orchards now, what we do is we provide spores to them before fruition, and bacterial mixes as well, actually, to help provide that mating type and help promote production. And we say that really actually does help. It takes about 16 months to impact, but it really does help. And I think so. I think if you've got an orchard and if you're not harvesting some of the earlier ones, maybe because they're not as appreciated in the market or whatever reason, and there's less then, if they're just being eaten by ground floor and the spores are being spread, then it's no bad thing, I think, because that's helping distribute those mating types in your orchard. That's one benefit, I guess, of leaving some in the soil. But as we've discussed a lot, will probably be left in the soil anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I have just remembered what I was going to ask. So I had a complete mind blank there for a minute. But when you were talking about, or when we were talking about the truffle season there and studying these, and you were like, oh, you wanted to study these further, and maybe the technology's there. One of the things, there's a guy who studies mushrooms, and I've wanted to invite him out, and he said, yeah, he's studying the mycorrhizae and of underground truffles and or of underground fungi. And I've said, well, I know how to find truffles in the wild. Like, let's go out on a hunt. Because obviously once you've dug up a truffle, you've kind of like, I guess you've almost you've ended the life cycle of that truffle from that point. Is it possible to see what's going on underground? And like, you probably have a closer finger on the pulse here with what technology is available, but how are people studying truffles underground without, impacting their their growth, basically, or their development?
Yeah.
How does it happen?
Yeah. There's many ways. So there's a lot of genetic techniques. So you can sample roots, you can sample the fruiting bodies, then you can see if it's the same genet, so it's the same individual, if you like, which is producing that fruiting body, whether it's providing the male or the female component. So there's a lot of these sort of indirect ways. There's sampling of the soil, looking at how much truffle DNA is in certain areas. But there's also on a more sort of highly focused approach, there's things like you can do labeling. So you can label, so to mycelium, you can add a sort of a fluorescence, and then with certain kick, you can see that fluorescence. I think in the field that's going to be really tricky. In the lab that works, but I don't know how hard that would be in the field. And that gives you, a visual representation. And this has been done with other fungi to look at what's happening across hyphae. So yeah, there's approaches like that, but normally in the field, it's sort of these more sort of indirect. You know, you're taking a sample here, 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 and here, and trying to link it together. Because obviously, you know, when you dig up a truffle, the threads that are in the soil, the fungi threads for the truffle fungus, are so fine and so small that you pretty much just don't see them even. You know, when you're harvesting. Yeah, it's a tricky
I've
thing.
got this vision of you know, the film documentaries like Fantastic Fungi. There's probably been many, and then
Yeah,
you see the very accelerated growth of a mushroom just going like that, and I'm like, oh, that would be so
yeah.
cool to see that with a truffle and like somehow lit up, but it's probably impossible.
Oh no, I've thought about that a lot, and I've
Have
thought about
you?
doing that. There's a guy, Patrick Hinckley, who I know over in Edinburgh, and he did a lot of the footage of mushrooms growing for documentaries.
Oh, cool.
It might have even been that one actually, but he's great. So he's done a lot of work for the BBC and places. But yeah, so I've often thought about maybe chatting to him a bit more about it. But with a truffle, it's underground, so it's kind of
Yeah.
hard, and you've got to have, you know, you get humidity on the lens. But I've thought about that a lot, because if we can just visually monitor the growth and what happens from a tiny pin onwards would be great. But how we do it, I'm not sure, Ben. A lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
But if anyone out there is listening and wants to do it or has
Yeah. Yeah.
technology to do that, hit me up and we can,
Yeah.
set that
Definitely.
up. Yeah,
Yeah. Send us a message.
yeah,
Cool. Professor Paul Thomas, that was a great interview, and I really appreciate your time. And I just want to be conscious of your time because I know you've got lots of things to crack on to today. So, you know, I will say for anyone listening who's enjoyed what Professor Paul has had to say, he's coming back to the festival in November, the UK Truffle Festival. So you'll have another opportunity to hear him speak and possibly, you know, rope him off to the side and ask him your question if you're lucky as well. But yeah, really grateful for you to coming to that as well, and look forward to hearing you there. And yeah, is there anything other final words that you know you want to leave people with, or how best, you know, because most likely there'll probably
yeah.
be some people with also, you know, your prospects listing as well. Who've got land and, you know, want to have start their own cultivation on a bigger scale. But like, what's the best way for them to learn more and get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. We've got a new website which is just about to launch. The old one's still there. It's Plantation Systems, all one word, systems with an S.com, because the company name is Mycorrhizal Systems and no one can spell that. But if you go there, there's lots more information. And the other thing I would say, if there's anyone interested from a research perspective, you know, any academics in any sort of connected fields, that we're always really open to collaboration and talking to other researchers. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch. So, yeah.
Awesome. And if there's anything that I can do with you for you in the future, just let me know as well. You know, leverage my limited influence in this space. That would be I'd be
Yeah,
very happy to do it. Cool. Thanks,
sounds great.
Paul. Speak to you
Yeah,
soon, and have a good rest of your day.
yeah. Thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, that was good fun and good to speak to you. Take care.
Hey, so if you like that episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast so you stay updated for when we release new content. Also, if you are interested, we have the UK Truffle Festival event coming up in just a few weeks, or if you're listening to this in the future, you may want to come check out the one that we're going to do in future years. Just head over to trufflefestival.co.uk and you can sign up. And equally, if you're interested in anything to do with truffles or training your dog and learning how to do truffle hunting, head on over to my main website, which is truffleforager.com, and you can find all the resources and help that you might need over there. And without further ado, see you on the next one. Bye-bye.